All right, let's start with Workers' Day and some of the reflections right now. Of course, some have been saying that unions may not be the appropriate vehicle right now in 2023 to address some of the worker issues. At the same time, you look at how the world of work has also changed over time. People working from home, you see, of course, in other industries, machinery has taken over. So quite a lot to reflect on, and others saying that the NGOs seem to have now taken the role that should have been played by trade unions to fight for workers' rights. So let's look at, just some of these particular issues. We're joined now by Labour analyst and writer Terry Bell and former Trade Unionist Frans Baleni. Thank you so much for your time this afternoon. I don't know whether I should say Happy Workers' Day to you both. Do I say that?
I don't know about happy. Frans, I don't know what you think.
well, I think we need to say Happy May Day, given our history and how we fought for May Day. So even if you've got nothing, you say Happy Christmas.
I suppose. Terry, you agree?
Well, yes, indeed, but, not if you're a turkey, and unfortunately many of us are turning into that for this May Day. But there is one thing to celebrate, and that was a long-awaited, very small victory at the Constitutional Court. Back in 1995, a small group of us, myself included, were very worried about the Labour Relations Act. And we, in fact, I called it a scabs charter at the time. I was so angry, by allowing for replacement labour at the times of strikes and allowing for a lockout by the employers. There have been a few battles with it over the years, but they continue to keep that in the Labour Relations Act. And this last week, finally, it's been removed, declared unconstitutional. So that's a small, tiny victory at a time where, quite honestly, this is the saddest May Day in my life.
And Mr. Baleni, Terry Bell talks about the saddest May Day in his life, and I'm going to come back to him to elaborate further on that one. But as a lot of people are reflecting on a day like today, they talk about how unions have kind of lost their voice and found themselves embroiled in politics, and they may not necessarily be seen as the powerful allies for workers as they once were in the years that we've seen before. So would you agree with the statement, or do you think that unions are still best placed to address some of the worker issues?
I think it's very unfortunate that the organized labor does not have the impact it used to have, for a number of reasons, Sibongile. The first one is that there's a high level of fragmentation, be it federation, be it trade unions. There's a high level of competition, competing and fighting for the same members. We've got a workforce, people who are employed, we're talking only about 14 million. That represents about 21.7% of those employed. Not organizing the unorganized. So we're not seeing the trade unions being strategic, policy making, and driving for change, especially in government and in the private sector.
And for you, Mr. Bell, when you say that this is the saddest May Day ever for you, what do you mean?
Well, because we've come, such incredible hope there was, especially after 1993, 1994. When we look at where we came from in 1973 with the so-called Durban moment, and that had its background as well, but it built up through the 80s, and we had this incredibly militant, but intensely democratic in many ways. Look, there were mistakes made and all that sort of thing, but nonetheless, incredibly democratic and united union movement. And it remained relatively united until 1996, when you actually had the argument about macroeconomic policy. And the trade unions came up with, to my mind, still the best, clearest policies in their social equity document, which was followed by Labour, by business with their own document, which was a total neoliberal thing, which was followed then by GEAR, which one leading economist, and he was certainly no radical whatsoever, referred to as a cascade of improbabilities. And that was what we ended up stuck with. And the union movement fell into line. And then we had the business unionism emerging. We had the investment companies being developed. Instead of, in other words, we had trade unions exploiting other workers in order to benefit their members. That's what it boils down to. And I think that's where we started going badly wrong. And since then, we've continued to slide. And in many ways, the unions are tending to think and act as if they're still in the middle of the 20th century, when in fact we're living in the 21st century with incredibly rapid progress in terms of technology and very rapid sliding down backwards in terms of unemployment and the ability to work and the sort of workplaces we work in.
And something that we've seen being an issue in recent days, Mr. Baleni, is that, we saw that strike by the workers, about that collective bargaining agreement that would have, been the last leg of that government needed to implement then. Today, President Cyril Ramaphosa saying, and I quote, "We as the ANC are fully committed to collective bargaining, and this commitment is irrevocable. And whatever problems we have in the alliance of government should be resolved through negotiations." But how much of this translates to what we are seeing on the ground, given the fact that there were those protests with workers demanding that government make good on its promise?
See, the problem here at the level of alliances, Bongi, is to confuse the political alliance with collective bargaining. Once trade unions expect that the alliance on its own should be a form of collective bargaining, then there's a problem. There must be a natural collective bargaining. Collective bargaining is about win and lose, making compromises. And the nature, as is the important point I want to raise, the nature of the public sector, it is not like they're engaging a profit-making organization. They are fighting about my contribution and your contribution. And therefore, although there's a need to ensure that there's decent wages and so on, but this is not a private sector. Government is not making any profit.
Mr. Bell, you agree?
Well, to a degree, but not totally, because the thing is, collective bargaining is a matter, and it's the vital part of trade unionism and of labor relations. Without collective bargaining, we have anarchy. And the point is that if you have a collective bargaining, it is a bargain. You reach an agreement, you make compromises. And then once you've done it, you sign on the dotted line, and that is it. What we actually have is a government that in 2018 pushed the unions, the majority of them, into signing a 3-year deal that they did not want to sign, pushed them into that, and then reneged on their own. It was a breach of contract in simple terms. They were able to get over it on a technicality about someone not informing Treasury, etc. That's irrelevant. I think the union movement and workers themselves were incredibly angry, and that's not just in the public sector. I don't think you could get away with that in the private sector, of reneging on a signed and sealed, long negotiated deal. So, I mean, the government has not shown very good faith up to now, this particular government. I'm pleased to hear them saying it's irrevocable now. Let us hope that it never happens again.
Mr. Baleni, one of the things that you spoke about earlier on is just the voice of the unions that is also being drowned out, but you say that it needs to be amplified and be important. How much of this would you say now, in terms of a gap, has been closed by the NPOs? Because some workers are now starting to run to these organizations in order to have some of their work, their issues understood.
It is being closed, Bongi, by the NPOs, in the sense that I normally say any strategic trade union should be the voice of the voiceless. In other words, the voiceless are those millions of unemployed people. If I may make another example, you talk about mining. Those organized workers should be the voice of the hosting communities. They work closely with them so that when they go on strike, those communities will be supporting them because they know what role they are playing. In the absence of that, so it means that we've got NPOs which are closing that space, including legal representation, workers going to legal something, legal wise, legal this, because they're not getting the necessary support they need from trade unions.
And Mr. Bell, what are the dangers then of this if we are seeing that the NPOs are beginning to close this particular gap when it comes to the relevance of the unions then in the future?
We have the fragmentation as well, which is happening because unions, as they were, have not done the work that they're supposed to be doing. And therefore, you have fragmentation, breaking away. We have, I don't know exactly how many unions there are several hundred. And there are more almost every day because of workers saying we've had enough of this. We're not getting the service from the unions. And then the NPOs step in, this non-profit organizations. Well, that's really the NGO business, as Mahmoud Mandani once called it, where a bunch of people now set themselves up and get themselves a job to look after the unions, which is what, in fact, the unions should be doing on the basis of the subscriptions from their members, democratically mandated by their members, not having some outsider NPO running it for them. That makes it even more dangerous and undermines the unions to an even greater degree. That's another reason I feel quite sad this May Day, because we have had not only the fragmentation, but all sorts of rather peculiar people stepping in. I heard this morning that the EFF and a group of people are now going to set up their own union called the Socialist Union of South Africa. And I have already said that the only thing that's missing from that is putting national at the front of it.
Something to ponder there as we end off our discussion. Let me thank you both for your time. And as you said, Dr. Baleni, I must say happy Workers' Day to both of you, regardless of what is happening. So happy Workers' Day to both of you. And thank you so much for joining us. That is Terry Bell, Labour analyst and writer, and of course, Frans Baleni, a former trade unionist.